Hello, everyone, and welcome to the What Fresh Hell? Laughing in the Face of Motherhood podcast. This is Margaret.
It's a prodcast?
It's a podcast, Amy. Listen, I'm shaking it up. I've had enough of podcasting, and I'm ready to move on to podcasting.
Get the title right. This is Amy, and this week we're talking about, do we share too much about our kids online?
Can I, before we get into that, make another joke that I'm stealing from another podcast that someone was trying to think of podcast names? I think it was the guy who does Maintenance Phase, Michael something. Anyway, I can't remember his name right now. But he was like, someone should do a history of fish podcast and call it the Codpast. And I was like, that's a great joke. So I had to share it here. It's a Codpast podcast. All right, anyway, here's what we're actually talking about today, Amy.
Oversharenting? Are you familiar with this word? It's in the dictionary.
I don't love it. I don't love the word because it sounds gross to me, but yes, it's oversharenting.
It's certainly judgy McJudge a lot, and I think we're going to talk about it when it's taken to extremes, but I think it's one of those things that's like, oh yes, I know this. Other very bad parents do this. Not me. Of course not me. I would never share something about my kids that they might not have wanted me to share.
I have a much more Oscar the Grouch take on this, which I will be getting to. Okay. And I talk about the gimlet eye, as Amy likes to say. Mine is flaring on this.
I mean, there were two recent articles, which we'll talk about, which everybody was like, it's our favorite thing to do to be like, aren't these horrible parents? And I think there's like a shocking lack of judgment on display. But to some extent or other, this is very common. There was a study at the University of Michigan. 75% of American parents were familiar with someone who overshared information about their child on social media. I was like, were they looking in the mirror when you asked them? Because approximately 100% of parents have at some point overshared something about their kid on social media, depending on who you ask, as in the kid.
Agree that everybody does this.
Right.
And I think this is an issue generally of personal preference. And I think that some of the like stranger danger stuff around this is completely overblown and insane.
Well, not for the articles that were recently out there, but those are extreme situations. That's why I'm like, yes, it's easy to say like, don't put your kid in an extremely dangerous situation with known pedophiles. Like, don't do that. Okay, that's a very short episode.
For sure. And I think that in general, this is a huge spectrum, and the danger of it is probably overstated. That is my point of view.
I think my point of view on this has really changed over. I mean, I've been a parent for 2 decades, and I've been on Facebook almost as long. I come from the past, children. And when my oldest kid was born, there wasn't Facebook yet. It sort of came, maybe there was Facebook, but nobody was using it yet. It came onto the scene when I had, I think, all 3 of my kids before I joined Facebook. And in the beginning, in the early days of social media, it was like, I'm being a good citizen of social media by telling you as much as possible about myself, by saying yes to every friend request that came along, and by showing everything about my life. That's what we do. That's how we build a better Facebook together. And now, 20 years later, I share very little. And my kids also share very little, even though they're constantly on social media, which is an interesting, like, I'm an avid consumer.
Not presenters.
Yes. I mean, I am a content creator. Again, like, I do a podcast, so I do create content. I don't create content very much on Facebook or Instagram for reasons that include some of the things we're going to talk about, but also my kids getting older and not wanting you to do that stuff.
For sure. So I'm not going to get into my pushback yet because I think my pushback is fairly specific.
Okay.
And I'm going to be asking the hard questions today, Amy,
okay.
But I'm keeping an open mind as well.
I think the only people who don't ever overshare about something on the internet are people who aren't on social media, which I have some friends who aren't. So they're definitely not oversharing because they literally don't have accounts.
Correct.
But that's the only way out. There was a survey that determined 92% of American 2-year-olds had some presence on the internet. I'm like, that sounds low, actually.
I want to be convinced of what the problem with that is. So let's go.
Well, let's start with the easy one. We're going to condemn the really bad people. Definitely not us. Definitely not us. Very good parents. Other bad parents who are oversharing about their kids on the internet. The first one was in Cosmopolitan. Just came out. It's by Forteza Latifi. She's written actually a whole series for Cosmopolitan, and I'll put this on there. What's the price of a childhood turned into content? And she interviewed young adult children who, when they were growing up, were part of a family creating content on Instagram. I mean, it's kind of like what John and Kate plus 8 used to do, except now it's on your phone instead of on TV. Right. That was on TV. And we all, and believe me, I watched John and Kate plus 8 and Sister Wives. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe you do this to your kids. I say, as I hit yes, start playing me the next
I
episode.
would like to see more of this, please. Yes.
Right. So I wasn't really aware of this stuff. So this is professional content creators. Like, mommy's job is to be an influencer, and now my job is to come home and
perform in this.
And perform for this video. And growing up in a time where you didn't really understand that other families didn't do this, and you also didn't really understand that as a child you should be being paid for this content.
Yes.
Just like a child actor used to be. You know, you're in the biz. You know about the Jackie Coogan law. Jackie Coogan was a silent film actor who became a talkie film actor. He was in a movie called, I think, The Kid. He was.
Isn't he Yankee Doodle Dandy? That's the one we loved.
That's Jimmy Cagney.
Oh, all right.
We're talking about Jackie Coogan. Yeah.
Oh, my bad. All right, so he was like a boy Shirley Temple back in the day.
He was a boy Shirley Temple, and everybody made bank on him except him. Like, he got to be an adult and found out his parents had spent all the money that he made as a child actor. So there's laws in place in Hollywood that 15% of their earnings, which is not that much.
I couldn't believe that when I was reading these articles. 15%. I'm like, shouldn't it be 70%?
Yeah, they it's a trust, and when they're 18, they get it. But until then, child actors, anybody who read Britney Spears' autobiography, are taken advantage of. And so this Cosmopolitan article is making the point that these kids, a lot of them, are being taken advantage of. And again, I feel like it's easy to read that and be like, yes, terrible parent, I would never do that. You know, let's get them. But then also, like, I'm on Instagram a lot, and there are families whose content I consume and love it. And I'm not talking about ones that, like, I'm pretending I ate all your Halloween candy and then, like, laughing while I made you cry on camera. Like, not that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of people who show their family's daily lives on the internet that I find edifying, that I find interesting, that I enjoy looking at. And I think it's just not so easy to be like, they're terrible and they shouldn't be doing that. Like, okay, except we're all watching it.
And it is the new television.
Mm-hmm.
So I recently had a strange experience where one of my children, in a completely random way, had the potential to be in a movie. It kind of came about bizarrely. Spoiler alert, it's not going to happen. But I was at once like, oh my gosh, this would be crazy. They're like asking us, like, are you free to travel to this country at these dates? Like, and we're like, I guess. And I immediately was like, yikes. Like, this is opening the door on a submarine, basically, this experience. That, like, it came out of left field. My kid was sort of seen somewhere like, oh, maybe they would be good for this. They had these weird special skills that went along with the role, this kind of situation. And we didn't get that close, but it was close enough that we were really kind of thinking through, like, is this something we would do? And I think the choice is, I mean, would I have had the strength of character? My kid was really excited about it. It would have meant a lot of money. It would have meant exciting travel. This was like a big, big deal. Would I have had the strength of character to say, I actually believe this will be a net negative experience, and therefore I will stand my ground against this net negative experience? Or would I have said, this experience could be a lot of different things. It could be a net positive. It could be a net negative. It's kind of taking this huge leap that we would not take if he just continues to be a normal and completely anonymous kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that social media is the new television. And would it have exposed a lot to this child or any child being suddenly in a movie where they have a big part and they're maybe famous? Also, maybe the movie never happens. There's a lot of variables, right? It's hard to predict. But putting that kid in the spotlight absolutely opens that kid up to wild amounts of criticism, to the dangers of having your face in front of a huge population of people that you don't know and have very different motives, right? And so I think that it's a tougher choice than we make it out to seem. That like it would also come with a lot of money and a lot of opportunities that our
Right.
family would never be exposed to otherwise. And those are the kind of choices that people are making. And I think there may be tons of people who set out to be huge social media stars, but it doesn't happen for 99% of the people who want it.
Well, so the other article that
Mhm.
was a horror read, and which I will link in the show
It's
notes,
the New
was
York Times article.
a marketplace of girl influencers managed by moms and stalked by men. And
Yes.
it's what you were talking about on such a smaller scale, but I understand. Like this isn't Hollywood money and 3 months on location. This is like 2,000 likes and $300 from a brand that wants your kid to wear their dance wear. Like it's small change. And yet the mothers, and it was all mothers in this article by the New York Times, it was all girls being shown in like leotards and bathing suits, like posing provocatively as like 9 and 10-year-olds. And then their moms posting this, getting a lot of likes, posting a little more, getting a lot of likes. Can I see one where she's doing this and that? And then they start to do these like, for a monthly fee, you can join our personal chat and you can send me stuff for her to wear and you can make requests and and you can ask her anything and I'll answer. And these moms are being sucked in and when it's sort of presented to them, like, your kid is being groomed, like what, you need to stop doing this. One of the mothers in the article was like, well, I can't. Like, I've built up this whole...
Right.
Her followers
It's a
will go
slippery
away.
slope.
Her
It's a
followers will go
slippery
away.
slope.
If I stop posting her in like lingerie, then nobody will, pay attention anymore. It's like, well, what does that matter? But the idea that you can say no to people who want to see you is it's weird. It doesn't occur to us.
I think there are certain things that are out of balance. I would say the like child beauty pageant always struck me that way. The kind of like toddlers and tiara world.
Yeah, and this
is
is just that now.
Girls very dressed up in makeup, very young and kind of strutting about. That seems to me like, okay. And it's this strange insular world where what's fascinating to me about those child beauty pageants is that very few people attend them. It's not like you're famous. It's happening in convention rooms of Holiday Inns in like small towns. It's a very strange small world. I think that is a very specific category. But I will say, we were talking about this movie role, and one of the things is that my kid looks younger than their age. And so that's apparently good for the movies because then you're dealing with an older kid, but they look younger. And then I was out in LA chatting with some people about it casually. And I said, well, the danger is that he's of an age where he might suddenly grow a foot overnight. And then, you lose the role. And someone said, completely jokingly, oh, they have hormone blockers for that. But I mean, I think that what happens is you find yourself very upside down very quickly. Like, wait a minute, we've signed the contract. We're doing this movie. We're being flown on a private jet to this island where we're going to meet this big movie star who's scurrying opposite my kid. Suddenly, like, someone's like, but he has to take hormone blockers because we don't want it. By the way, this did not happen, but I'm just using an example of like, suddenly you're in the position of saying, I've realized way too late that this is morally compromised and I don't know how to back out of it. I'm not defending this whole industry, but I understand it. I feel like you get lost in something pretty quickly. And you've got, what is that called when you spend the money, sunk cost fallacy, right? You've got $40,000 worth of outfits in the closet for Little Miss Peachtree or whatever. I don't know. I think that you get lost pretty easily.
But this is more insidious, right? Because first of all, that was a lot more expensive. So people definitely bankrupted themselves on, Little Miss Junior, whatever.
Correct.
But there were some barriers to entry. There's a trophy and 40 people saw it and it's in your kid's room. And unless it's John Benet Ramsey, or they're on Toddlers and Tiara, the rest of us didn't know about it. But these people who are putting their kids on Instagram in provocative poses for $10 a month are creating a digital footprint for their kids that can be used.
That lasts forever.
I
can come on firmly on the anti side of that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll talk about the digital footprint and other secondary results of posting about our kids. So the digital footprint, I have a funny story about this. So one of my kids is a first year in college, and their friends have recently discovered this podcast. And they thought it was funny. My kid thinks it's funny. Their friends think it's funny, and they're going back and looking at posts. Anyway, my kid recently, that kid resurfaced a post that I had put on Instagram 12 years ago, where I just said something like, my 10-year-old says, no way, this was an actual TV show. And it was like a silly TV show from the 70s that kid at that time was like, no way you actually watched that. I'm like, yes, I did. That's what was on. And that's what we watched. Completely innocuous. But it just was like, holy cow. Like my kid is going back through a decade of my content on social media and finding something that they can tag themselves in and be like, this was me. I remember this. And I was like, wow, that's really harmless and no big deal. But wow, that ability is there. And I hadn't really thought about that before.
Yeah, it's intense. And I do think we had a discussion when we started the podcast that this is not a podcast where we talk about our own children. It's not about my kids' dilemmas. It's not about I have a kid who's struggling with this and that. But certainly we talk about our kids we're struggling with this at my house. We try to keep it very vague, try to keep it, non-informational about our kids. It's one of our kids. But I never heard my mother talk about me and my life. I mean, if my kid wanted to go back through 9 years of content and listen for every time I referenced them, would they all be glowing? And would they, a mother can definitely say like, oh, you're wearing that. And it's like, okay, you've ruined my month. And so it is definitely, you're leaving more of a footprint than you think.
Yes. And they would have no problem with that. And then they might, like what they would consent to. And they can't consent as an 18-month-old to you putting their Halloween costume up on Facebook because it's so adorable, right? And I think that's probably fine. But they can't consent. And so at what point, we don't have an agreement as a society. Like at what point is this okay? And at what point should you start taking this down? There was a study. They interviewed 250 sets of parents and children that found that the kids were twice as likely than the grown-ups to say grown-ups shouldn't post information about kids online without their permission. I mean, it seems like something I would say yes to in the general, and then maybe not in the specific. So I'd have to look at what the questions were. But the kids were way more likely to be like, yeah, they can't do that. And adults being like, I think it's fine to post a picture of my kid in their Halloween costume.
Yeah, I'm just not lit up by this. I think that there are laws that are starting to come about that are at 18, you can demand that your digital footprint is erased.
In Europe, it hasn't happened here yet. So
there's one in some state. I mean, I was just listening to a podcast about it, but there's one that's coming up in California to pass that law. I think some of it is technology changing, right? That like it used to be that like your boyfriend came over when you were 16 and your mom would be like, look at this picture of Margaret when she was in the dance recital. And you'd be like, I mean, is it for the whole world? Yes. But I do think in the same way that my kids have YouTube channels that I was like, I don't know, should you be on YouTube? It's them screaming at the top of their lungs while playing video games with their 5 friends who are all screaming simultaneously. It is unwatchable content.
But it's also not public, right? You also have the settings set that you have to know.
Oh, no. They're public because they think they're going to be huge YouTube superstars. And I'm like, this is interesting to no one. At first, when they were younger, I mean, they're teenagers now. I was like, oh, you have to keep everything private. And, God forbid your face is on the internet and it will set off a furor of pedophiles in every direction. And now I'm like, oh, this content is useless. Nobody wants to see it. And there are 8 billion kids with crappy YouTube channels that nobody watches because they're terrible.
Yeah, but the kids,
I'm not scared about it.
I'm trying to think, that's not what you're sharing. So I wonder if that's the problem, is like what we're sharing about our kids. They are old enough. I mean, I'm not going to argue that it's great for everybody to have a YouTube channel. I don't really care. But if they're choosing to share content and it's not self-reflective content, it's like, look at me playing Mario Kart, then maybe that's different. Like, here's an example. I saw an example in some of the research I was doing. I'm like, oh, I remember this story. And this is the perfect example. This kid who was so lonely. He cried to his mother that he was lonely and he didn't have any friends on his birthday. Right. And she posted a picture of him, sitting in his room like, this is my son. He doesn't have friends. Nobody at school is nice to him. And it's his birthday. Can everybody please, wish him a happy birthday? Cue, The Rock comes to his house,
right.
40,000 cards. He's on TV, and her post went viral with him in it. And it did him a lot of good. So they went and interviewed her and him 5 years later.
Right.
So like, how do you feel about this? And she's like, it was so good at the time. Now I'm like, I'm sorry. Are you embarrassed that I say like you're, like a loser who has no friends on the internet? Like, I said that when you're 11, now you're 16. And he's like, well, I guess that I would rather everybody not know that, but it was true. It is true. And then he's turns out he's not neurotypical. Like it's complicating. So in this case, the mother was like, yes, I would do it again. And I remembered seeing that content and being like, oh, like I had a good morning that morning, knowing that little boy was out there and The Rock was like flying to see him and wish him a happy birthday. You know what I mean? But that he can't get away from that guy. Like that is, unless he changes his name, he's ever going to forever. If you do a search for that kid, that's going to come up on the first page. You can say it's terrible or it's not a big deal, but it's true. That is tied to his identity.
Yeah. And I think that there are kids whose school picture becomes like the meme of like the super dork, Yeah. There is like the little kid with his fist up who's like a little fat, cute baby with his fist up, and people use that as a meme. And definitely those people give interviews later where they're like, yeah, it's not the best, that like my awkward high school picture. But also people just found that in a book somewhere. Their mom didn't share it. I think the randomness of internet life is a problem, but I'm not sure we have as much control over it as this debate suggests. I would suggest that if you're taking requests from strangers for your kids to perform in any kind of outfit online, you've lost the script at some point. Like
right.
That, I'm down with that. I think that, yes, if you want to be 100% safe, you never put your kids online. Someone I know, there was a bunch of kids making prank calls in a park one day, and someone filmed them to say, like, these awful kids are wasting people's time prank calling them. Those kids may end up on the internet either as heroes or being vilified for making prank calls. I mean, I think that the internet is the wild sea and people get caught up in it in different ways. I think that you can probably make safer choices about how you interact with it. But do I post pictures of my kids on Facebook? And I love seeing all my friends' kids on Facebook and social media. And I guess my settings are not public. I guess my friends only can see them, but they're
right.
out there. Like if I posted a picture, we have a friend, Megan from the Mom Hour, right? She has a famous picture where she was at a wedding. She's talked about it on the podcast. And she's dressed in a bridesmaid's dress, and she's carrying her tantruming toddler. But he's
surfboard.
Like 6, surfboard style.
She's surfboarding her child.
Right. You could picture, like, he is stiff as a board, and she has him, like she's carrying a surfboard under her arm. And with this kind of grim, determined face, we'll link to it in the show notes. She's walking this kid out of the wedding. And it went super viral, and it's used all over. It's been used in advertising. People repost it. It's a meme, right?
Yeah, it's become a meme. Yeah.
Mom
who's had it.
Mom who's had it she's kind of the meme picture. And she's written a lot about the consequences of that and the frustrations of that, and seeing it used in places and seeing it kind of making money for other people and used in ads and all this crazy stuff. But she kind of can't get that genie back in the bottle.
You can't. Yeah. I mean, that's it. I mean, you can't control how stuff is used, including now, like with AI. Like every time you check your privacy settings, every time you put a picture up on social media, it can be used to create a composite of whatever. Like we're all just signing this stuff away. And maybe it doesn't matter and maybe it does. But what's definitely true is you can't claw back. Something else to consider, right? If you have a kid who at some point their identity doesn't match for gender reasons, for other reasons. My identity now doesn't match that person that you used to post about. It's way harder to erase every trace of that than you would think it would be.
Yeah. I mean, I think I do the risk assessment and I'm like, it's fine. I post a funny picture and I'm like, this was my life on this day. And I understand that there is a very small risk that that picture will become completely out of my control, but I'm just not that interested in it. I'm like, all right.
Well, how about some identity theft? Let's talk about that because that's something we really can watch for.
Sure.
Through social media, I'm giving you the head of digital safety for Barclays Bank. They put out a paper explaining that it is super easy for fraudsters on social media to collect information about us and more importantly about our kids. Like you can play the long game because the digital footprint exists, right? And the data is attached to somebody and then it keeps going. So for your kid who's 10 now and will be 22 and getting a credit card in a decade, it is very easy for somebody to have been able to pull from their history of data their pet's name, their first grade teacher's name, where they go to school, their best friend, where they go on vacation, their mother's maiden name. Like all that stuff that you use for passwords and security is freely available on social media if you mine the data. And I'm not talking about like, let me see if I can go figure it out myself. I'm talking about like scrapers can use this stuff.
Sure.
So, and I think we do share, I've seen people share pictures of their kids in bathing suits with location data explaining like where they live and where the picture was taken.
But tease that out for me. Like what? Why not? I mean, what's the problem? Like someone's going to see them become so obsessed with their kid that they're going to come to their house and kidnap them?
I mean, if you
that's
read
never happened in the history of time.
Are you kidding? The New York Times article, that's what happened to those girls.
They got kidnapped?
What happened. Police got involved because they didn't get kidnapped, but somebody was stalking them. Yeah. But somebody showed up at their school because the person put the school. Why would you?
That's not the same as putting a Facebook, because I think that like people drill it down. That's an Instagram account that is like famous kids, right?
Yeah.
And fame and kids comes with a huge amount of risk, right? There certainly are people who become obsessed with people who are famous. There are also people who become obsessed. I mean, you can read stories about people who literally, like there was this long criminal podcast about someone wrote on a political debate, like, you're an idiot or something to someone. And like they stalked that person for 3 years. Like weird stuff can happen.
Yeah.
But I think that the volume of people who are posting pictures of their kids with their school name on their sweatshirt, I do not think there's a huge consequence to that.
Well, there might be. Except when there is. Except when there
might be, but also someone might pass your kid walking home from school and being like, that kid is the kid for me, and follow them home from school.
Sure.
Like,
but they have to all come from school, but you don't have to put a picture of them in a bathing suit on social media saying like, this is the park where we go every Tuesday and Thursday. You just don't. It's a cell phone. Like, just don't do that. You know, you can.
I can't get there. I feel like it's like the fear of like, oh my God, don't ever put your kid's name on their backpack because someone could call them by name and kidnap them. The danger of that is infinitesimal. And like the fear factor around it is too high for me.
But what is the positive of doing it?
Because you know it's your backpack. It's school.
No.
I mean,
forget the backpack. I mean, I my kids live in New York City, and I never put their name on anything once they were old enough to be going places by themselves for that very reason. But I just think there's no reason to. I just think we have to consider the stuff that we're sharing sometimes because like, what are we getting out of it? What are we getting out of sharing personal information about our kids that can be used to like steal their identity 20 years later? Like there's no reason to do it. There's nothing good about doing it.
I have a pushback. I have a strong pushback. Okay. We'll be right back. So in the summer, we often go to this lake and there's a dock that my kids dive off of that's like 16 feet in the air. And I get these amazingly cool pictures.
I've seen these pictures.
You've seen them.
On social media. They're beautiful.
Off the dock, right? They're beautiful. Like the sun is setting. It's kids flying through the air. Like I love them. And I often put them on Facebook, Instagram. You've seen them. People have seen them. They're my kids in bathing suits. Is that location, like there's a guy who does a thing online. He's a TikToker. And you could show him any picture. And he's like, I can tell you where that is. I can tell you where that's happening. I like to share those pictures to be like, look at what we're up to. Like, look at my beautiful photograph. Look at my kids enjoying summer. Right. Like all my friends see them. I see what all my friends' kids are doing in the summer. Everyone's having fun. So is there any reason to do that? Because I like to share it and I love the photos and I love my friends and family to see them. And I don't think the risk of someone seeing those photos and tracking down that location and coming for us is high enough not to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue those pictures are like far away. You can't tell who the kid is. You can't, you know, like they're the kind of picture that I think it is okay to share.
Yeah. I just really think that it's a little bit stranger dangery, the internet stuff. Is there a chance it will happen? There's a chance a lot of things will happen, but I don't think that putting pictures of your kids up on social media in a sharing way, for me, that danger is not profound.
Well, let's talk about at what point your kids get a say, because I don't know what the answer is to this. At what point do your kids have a say in I don't want you to post those pictures anymore. They're embarrassing. They're embarrassing when my friends see them at school or show them to me. That has already started to happen with my kids. Like we did not do a Christmas card this year. We do, at least in the Northeast, we do Christmas cards. We do beautiful family photos that we send around. And I'm not putting these on social media. I'm sending them to, a couple hundred of our closest family and friends, certainly. And my kids like vetoed it. Wouldn't do it. I'm like, well, I don't want to send like a card with Santa on it to a couple hundred people. That seems like a lot of work. So I guess I'm not doing this year. But my kids actually were like, no more. I don't want a picture of us that you think is cute. I don't want to participate in this. I don't want to do this anymore. And I don't know when. I think it's something we don't think about. When
I think they get a
our
vote.
Kids a vote.
And I do know people who've had situations where people have posted stuff on Facebook like, Joey has his first girlfriend. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not my girlfriend. That's a girl I talked to twice. Like, don't put that on Facebook. Like, don't. I think as kids, and I used to post a lot more when my kids were younger. And I have a kid who wears kooky outfits. And I was always like, these are hilarious. Like, they're making me laugh. Let me share the joy of like this person's daily ridiculous getup and stuff. And I probably wouldn't do that with a 13-year-old in the same way I would do it with an 8-year-old.
Yeah.
And if the 13-year-old came and said, people found these pictures and they're embarrassing me, I would take them down. I would say, okay, we'll just delete them. And I can't scrub them forever. But
you
again,
can't scrub them forever, but hopefully it wouldn't matter. Hopefully that kid, some picture 5 years from now doesn't become like the internet meme of the week. And it probably won't happen. And that you're taking that in teeny, tiny, small chance. And it's probably fine.
For sure. And if it does happen and your kid's mad at you, they probably have every right to be mad at you. But I think that it is part of our social custom to share our kids on certain social media platforms in a way that I feel comfortable with. And everybody has different, this is the other thing. I'm not telling anybody what to do. If you want to stay completely off the internet, it's fine. I just think as a discussion, I am resistant to anything that feels fear-based and not totally accurate in terms of risk versus reward. Like the kind of stranger danger stuff, I feel overall, there's not a tremendous amount of risk from it. And that is my choice. And that is the choice I choose to make. If you want to be 100% safe, yes, you have to keep all information about your kids off. We were pretty aware when starting a podcast, when we talked about our own lives, to say, our husbands didn't consent to this. Our kids didn't consent to this. And to the degree that we talk about them, we try to keep it very nonspecific. I think that makes sense. We are, and also we're making money from this podcast and they didn't consent to it and they're not getting money from it. There's a lot of factors that go into how you choose to interact and put your kids out there. And yeah, I would say 5 years ago, I was posting pictures of my kids weekly, and now I post pictures of my kids almost never.
I think our kids are doing that. This is what's so fascinating to me, getting back to what I was saying in the beginning about my kids are avid users of social media platforms, but they post something every 6 months. Or they probably have, which is very, I think, healthy, and I don't want to know, they have their private story that they share with 5 people and that kind of thing. But in terms of what they're showing the world, it's very curated and it's very cautious. and it's just very thought out, and it's just very a little bit at a time.
Yeah, and I think there
that's
is a
interesting.
bright line as I'm talking between making stuff for money, even if it's a small amount of money, and like sharing pictures of your vacation on Facebook. I think they're kind of they have two different purposes. They have two different everything. I think it gets much sketchier when you're doing it. And I mean, family vloggers, I don't know. I mean, I think certainly I've made video content regarding the podcast that my kids were in because I was like, oh, this would be funny. And it's about the kid and they're in it. And
but they're playing a character. You're not
they're playing a character.
who they
It's
are,
not
you know,
like
having a
here's
stomach
their
bug.
first date and getting dressed for, but
Mhm.
still, like, I mean, not that we made money off of the videos, but you know what I mean? Like it was content. And so I guess it's a little bit of a slippery slope, but I think that you have to be careful of like the fear mongering around it. And then you also have to be careful of the letting it change the dynamic of your relationship. And when my kid was thinking about doing this movie thing, I mean, the number one thing I thought is you can't participate in this without it changing the trajectory of your life. And you can't participate it without suddenly, if this person is the biggest breadwinner in the family, it changes his relationship.
Yeah.
It changes their relationship with parents. It changes everything, you know?
I have been such just to say, put a penny in the jar of like the content that's shared online. There's such good parenting content.
Yeah.
This is our life with nonverbal autism in our house. This is what it looks like. This is how we do it. This is how our life looks like with this. This is how I'm teaching my kid to sign, whatever it is. I love that content. I am an avid consumer of that content. It's taught me so much. I think it's really doing a huge service to a lot of people. The content that people create when you're like, I'm part of this group and come be part of my community if you're like me. I mean, it's kind of like what we've done on a more maybe broadly based way. I think it's so valuable. So it's not never a good idea.
No, and I
It's
think
what's so
people would
hard.
push back and say that this kid with certain needs can't consent to their story being told. Like there's a lot of, it's kind of a prism, and I think it's hard to land on like these are the rules of social media engagement. But I think that in 2024, I feel like I get a lot of peace from not fighting things that are absolutes. And I feel like social media and the way we share is kind of an absolute. And I'm not lit up by, oh my gosh, don't share pictures of your kids. It's super dangerous.
If you want a funny example of like clawback and how it can be hard, if you go to Apple Podcasts for this podcast and you look at our host pictures at the bottom, I managed to change mine away from one that was truly terrible, but like our pictures, I don't know where they pulled them from. Like they're just pictures from past versions of us, and we cannot get them changed. And I'm fighting with Google right now about if you look up Amy Wilson is a common name, right? Which is kind of good in this day and age, but it's created like a Frankenstein composite of Amy Wilson that I host this podcast, and I'm also a rodeo queen, and I'm trying to contact them and be like, that's not both me. Those are two different people. And I didn't write that book, and that's not. And Google's like, no, we know best. It's like, nope, we've put this together, and this is who you are. We've decided. It does get away from you, and those are stupid, non-important examples. But
yeah, for sure. It's also a bit of a numbers game. Like it's the thing of, I'm afraid that my adorable kid goes on YouTube and suddenly becomes 4,000 people watching them, and I forget that there's 40 billion other kids also doing the exact same thing, and nobody cares.
There was one bit of advice that I thought was good as a takeaway. Paula Kokoza, she wrote an article for The Guardian, and she suggested that just like we talk about the birds and the bees with our kids, to use her term, that we also have a sort of a digital rule book chat when the kids get to a certain age. These are our rules about sharing. This is what we do and what we don't do. I'm quoting her. We are the first generation of parents and children to negotiate this path. The dilemmas are shared dilemmas. It's a moment of overlap. And then we should be intentional.
And I like the word dilemma there, because I think that's the key. Like it's not a place
danger,
of
it's a
hard and
dilemma.
fast rules. It's a place of, because it's what's the word? It's fluid, right? Like, okay, I post a picture of my kids so that, my uncle in Delaware can see it and be like, the kid's growing up nice. Like, that's 9 billion times a day. And then if that kid suddenly blows up and something, you've got another conversation. But I think there are basic rules going in about how we set privacy settings and talking about how things last for ourselves and our kids, and the Rubicon of these kids are passive participants to their active participants, which I'm saying is 12 or 13 generally.
Right.
Where suddenly, oh, Bobby has his huge first pimple. Like that has a really different outcome for Bobby at 13 than it did at 7 when it was cute little Bobby. And now at 13, Bobby's like, yo, all my friends are seeing this and stop.
Yeah. Yeah. And they will go back and look, as I've learned. And like I said, in my case, it was pretty harmless, I think. But yeah, the history, I learned firsthand that the history is long.
It's
of
forever.
This thing I did not remember posting more than a decade ago.
Yeah, forever. And listen, don't come at me and be like, you're dead wrong. I mean, you can come at me if you want, but I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you where I've arrived at my own comfort.
Mm-hmm. These are some things you might take into consideration as you navigate this dilemma on behalf and with your children.
Correct.
We solved it.
Solved it as usual, Amy. Speaking of social media, are you following us wherever we are on social media? We're on Facebook at What Fresh Hellcast. Our Facebook group is Our Facebook group is facebook.com/groups/What Fresh Hellcast. That's the place you want to be. And we're on Instagram at What Fresh Hellcast. You can find us everywhere.
We're on YouTube. We're on TikTok.
Go to whatfreshhellpodcast.com if you're like, I haven't found What Fresh Hell every single place I want to. We're linked everywhere, people. We are on the socials, but you know what's not
our
there?
Digital
Pictures
footprint
of our kids.
Massive digital footprint of us.
Wait until you see the picture of me at my 11th grade prom. Now if that went viral as a meme, Amy, it would be the end of my social life forever.
I am 100% for sharing embarrassing pictures of yourself as an adult from when you were a kid. That's always
totally fine. All right, friends. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks.